So for the next hour, I want to focus on a concept that I ended up calling the freedom framework. And it's very much in line with that 1%, 101% gains are easier than 100% gain. And I think, so this idea was born out of building a saleable or scalable business. And whether you want to sell your business or not, if you build it with the principles around which selling a business works, then you will end up with a better business, whether you decide you want to sell it or not. Because it's the same principles that make a business very saleable that also create the opportunity to have a brilliant lifestyle business. Now, it might be, for example, like Bhavesh is right at the start of his new business journey. He's probably thinking, well, I'm not thinking about selling the business. I'm only just thinking about starting the business. But if you build it with the right principles from the start, as Stephen Covey said, if you start with the end in mind, you end up with a much, much better business. And then whether you choose to sell it or not is up to you at that time. And I'll talk a little bit about the process that I went through mentally and from a business point of view to sell different businesses. But I think that's the key. It's if you start with the right ideas in mind and with the end in mind, you build a way better business that allows you to scale or sell at some point in the future. And I want to theme this around the sale of efficient portfolio. But actually, I've built and sold 3 businesses to date, and then we're building another 3 at the moment. And the sale of efficient portfolio, which was definitely my most profitable sale, was actually born out of a conversation with Michelle Hoskins. It's a shame Michelle's not here quite yet, but Michelle Hoskins was the kind of initial driver for us selling efficient portfolio. So Michelle and I have been friends for a long time. She said I could do with a day of your coaching, Charlie, and I said, well, in exchange for that, you can come and do a day's coaching with me and my leadership team. And within that time, and we're talking March 2020, so just before COVID, but at this point we didn't know we were going to lockdown or any of that. She sits us down, and the first question she asks, Charlotte, Tom, who's on holiday today but is normally here, and Helen, who are my leadership team, she looks at them, says, at some point Charlie's going to want to sell this business. So what's the plan? Are you guys going to buy it? Are you guys going to help him sell it? What's the plan? And I was like, Jesus, don't hold any punches. Don't hold back any punches, Michelle. Let's start as we mean to go on, shall we? And it kind of created this real tension that put us on the spot, and put them on the spot in particular. And it became apparent quite quickly that they weren't willing to borrow enough money to buy me out of the business. So then we're like, right, okay, so therefore we need to make a different plan. If it's clear that you don't want to do that, then we make a different plan. And on that day, we came up with a plan as a team that we were going to sell efficient portfolio on a 5-year time horizon. We set the number, and the number we originally set was the smallest number that we could pick. That was an 8-figure number. And that was really very much let's put a finger in the air. That sounds like a ridiculously good number. And then I said, well, if we're going to pick a number that starts with a 10, 12 is my lucky number. So why don't we just go with 12? And it was as scientific as that. It was literally ridiculously finger in the air, whatever. But but we had a number. And then the end of the day came, the rest of the leadership team left, and Michelle was still in the room, and she said, you do realize it won't take anything like 5 years? And I was like, no, but of course it's going to take 5 years. We're never, ever going to get anywhere close to that in less than 5 years. She said, well, it never takes 5 years. I'm like, okay, we'll see. Anyway, we all then go into lockdown. I have 6 months working from home thinking, oh my God, is this what life will be like post-sale? Actually, do I want that? Kind of lots and lots of thoughts going around in my head, going, how what's all this look like? What would life be like post selling EP? And so, as I've taught you guys, we had our leadership meetings every quarter. And we came into the leadership meeting at 6 months later. So we'd had 6 months of lockdown, and it was our annual leadership meeting. So it was a two-day session with the leadership team. And really, by that point, I'd got my head around it. And I came into that leadership meeting, so 6 months after we'd dropped the bombshell of that we were going to build a five-year exit. I came into that leadership meeting and I said, at the start of it, I said, right, I've had a change of heart. We're not doing this as a 5-year plan. We're doing it as a 1-year plan. And of course, immediately, oh my God, that's just, there's no way we can do that. But it changed everything. And it changed a few things. So just by having the 5-year plan, we knew exactly, there were certain projects that we had on the go that we were thinking, we'll do this. It's like we were going to be the early adopter for a piece of software that wove AI into the whole back office process. And immediately we were like, well, that'll only just be really starting to succeed in 5 years' time. It doesn't help the sale. In fact, probably takes our eye off the sale. Therefore, it doesn't make the boat go faster when that is the single biggest goal. So it was like brilliant, because you could just look down the long list of ideas we had and go, does that make the boat go faster? No, yes, no, yes, no, yes. And it just really, really clarified our thinking. So in the leadership meeting, we set about this as a 1-year goal, and basically we just set all of the targets based on what we needed to do, and a lot of it we had done successfully, and a lot of what I'm going to come on to in terms of what we learned around what made a business saleable, we'd already been doing over the years. And then there was other things that we decided that we should do to make it a more saleable business, and that was particularly around putting processes in place, which Michelle helped us do. Went through the ISO standards. As it happened, that made no difference to our sale, but if we'd had a different buyer, it would have made a big difference. But it allowed us to create a whole load of processes and really understand where the value was in the business. And initially, for that 6 months, we didn't tell any of the rest of the team, only the leadership team. And we went through the conversation as to when do we tell the rest of the team, because at some point you've got to tell them what you're up to, because otherwise they're going to find out anyway. And so we ended up, we did a kickoff meeting at the start of each year, and we told them within that, and we kind of positioned it in that it was a great opportunity, and because by that point I'd worked out what was coming down the line afterwards, and that we could offer them jobs in new businesses and all those sorts of things. So we could sell it as an opportunity for them to succeed and make a good amount of money. We paid them we offered them a handsome bonus to stay, and but it was how we communicated that was tricky. But it actually wasn't the first business I'd founded and sold. So historically, I'd also founded a business called the Rural Business Community. I was telling Amy about this over dinner last night, because we've never really kind of spoken about it much before, but founded that and sold that. And also, before Accelerate, I actually had a power planning business that we built and sold called Efficient Power Planning. It then became ePowerplan, which I know a couple of people, well, maybe somebody in the room might have used. It's nothing to do with me now and hasn't been for a while, but I did found that business and sell it. And so I want to when I look at these different businesses, I realize that and how we built them and how we sold them, we can look back and go, well, there's actually some key trends here that allow us to understand how we build a better business so that it is saleable and scalable. And one of those tools, which I think is really, really powerful, and if you're not already using it in your business, then you absolutely must. If you haven't done this as part of, because if you've only relatively recently joined the trusted team, but the one-page business plan is absolutely the most important business tool that we use to be able to build and sell the business. because it made sure that the whole leadership team were on the same page in terms of what we were doing on a quarterly basis. What are the goals? What were the goals over the year? Everyone knows that they're heading in exactly the same direction. And then it's also about how you communicate that to the wider team. Because once you're all on board as a leadership team, you then communicate with that with the extended team. And again, everyone knows where you're heading. And so that one-page business plan, if you haven't done that, in the portal there is the piece of coaching around the one-page business plan and then the tool itself. But I would definitely make sure that you were using that, building the leadership team around it. From a personal point of view, the Limitless Life Planner was then where I set, because sometimes there's goals within that are about what's really right for me, and so it's my personal goals. So that's the equivalent that I use there. But I think it's also key, like as and when if you get to the point where you do want to sell, or you want advice on how you would sell, is to find the right who's. What I found was there's a lot of people that were very happy to try and tell me that they would sell my business, but there's a huge amount of snake oil salesmen in that sector. And the greatest advice I got along the way for our sector, for financial services, was Michelle, who's obviously speaking later on, and Louise Jeffries, who has spoken, I think, in year 1 of the Trusted Team, and I've actually lined her up as a guest speaker again for next year around this whole build to sell concept. Because really it's knowing the who's to give you the advice on what's right, that's really important. And when I think back to the advice they gave me and what worked for us on those different businesses, I think there's really 4 key steps to building a saleable and scalable business. And I think really what it needs to be is, the first thing is it needs to have founder independence. If it's all reliant on having the business owner there, it's not a saleable business. It's only, basically it's a lifestyle business, but nobody is going to buy it if it's reliant on you being there. The next piece is about having recurring revenue, and that to me, I'll explain in a minute, but that to me was in financial services, we fell on our feet with that. It's a model that is just natural financial services, and we can do it better than is the default. But that becomes unbelievably powerful if you want to sell your business. And I know some sectors, I can imagine your sector, that's a much more difficult thing to get your head around, but we'll come back to why it's so important. Then we've got this engine for growth. So I thought possibly the most valuable part of Efficient Portfolio was our automated marketing machine. 3 years after selling that business and turning off what we thought were the lead generators, we still get leads coming into that business because we had this automated marketing machine, this engine for growth. So that to me is really valuable. As it happens, the firm that bought my business didn't buy that, so it carries on delivering the leads to us, not them, which is stupid, but that's their issue. And then the vision, the exit vision, it needs to be really clear, and that's like, will it make the boat go faster? Am I moving it? Am I making decisions that are taking us in the right direction? So let's start with this founder independent piece. So when I created Efficient Power Planning, it wasn't originally it wasn't a big plan. It wasn't a key goal. It had been sort of loitering around in my mind as an idea for a while, and I may or may not have written it down in my goals. But what was the driving factor behind it was, so in Rutland, recruiting qualified power planners. So, and by the way, for those of you that don't know the financial services terms, power planner is somebody that has all the financial advisor qualifications, but they sit backstage doing things like the financial plan and the research and that sort of stuff, like a paralegal, but in financial planning. And so Accelerate, Matt's also not here today, but Accelerate is another form of a power planning business, outsourced power planning business. But basically, recruiting qualified power planners in Rutland was nearly impossible. It was so difficult. And so typically we just trained them up right from no industry experience. But sometimes you just need to find another power planner. So we were recruiting for a power planner, and it's like waiting for a London bus, isn't it? You can't find one forever, and then 2 come along at once. We're like, well, they're both really good. We can't let either of them go because we don't know when we'll need a power planner, but we really only need one at the moment. So what we'll do is we'll recruit both and we'll create an outsourced power planning business. It'll be a good buffer so that when Efficient Portfolio grows some more, we'll have more access to it, but it's also a sideline business. So I put the capital into that business to get it up and running. My practice manager at the time was a lady called Michelle, not the Michelle that's speaking later, a different Michelle. So Michelle ran Efficient Power Planning alongside being my practice manager. Katie, who was the power planner we recruited, that we dropped straight into Efficient Power Planning, did all the power planning, and that business built up quite nicely. I got paid back the capital I had put in, but the whole point was I never ever got involved in running that business. I never did any work in that business. I spoke a few times to promote it. I spoke at the BDN network. I'd use it in talks as an example to try and generate business for it. But I was never, ever involved in that business. And in fact, we had that business before we'd introduced the concept of leadership meetings, I think. So I wasn't even doing proper leadership meetings or the structure that we teach you guys nowadays. But the point was I built it with founder independence. I didn't do any jobs within it. And I think that's ultimately the most important piece of having a saleable business. Because if the whole business is based around you and you want to step away from it, it becomes an unsaleable business. Now you can sell assets, and those assets might be clients, but equally a business that knows that you are there, they're solely, and we were talking about this earlier, Terry, where if they know that the clients are there because you're there and you leave, they go, well, there's a significant flight risk now. Therefore, the business is worth less than if we know that they're staying put, whether you're there or not. So if you can build founder independence into your business, you have a way more saleable and scalable business, because the biggest bottleneck that most businesses have is the business owner themselves. They get in the way of too many things. So the more you can get yourself out the way, the more you have a business that works and that is saleable and scalable. And one of the best ways you can do that is through what we call here the magnification mastery. It's the concept of magnification mastery, and the coaching around that is in the portal again. The one key principle I want to share with you from that, though, is the client review workshop, because a few of you won't have done a magnification mastery. If you want to dive into this deeper, I would suggest you go into that part of the portal. But one of the things that made Efficient Portfolio so much easier to sell and more valuable, we'd introduced, so we had about 400 clients as a firm, all on doing financial, all like proper clients. So we were seeing them every year. They were all getting an annual review, and it's taking huge amounts of time up, and we're repeating the same thing to the same people time and time and time again. Like the market crashes, and the next 3 months of review meetings are all explaining why the market's crashed, why you should need to put your tin hat on and ignore the market crashing, and why the portfolio's positioned to be okay to deal with that. Oh my God, how many times have I said this in the last 3 months? And also, we didn't have time to communicate new financial planning opportunities as well, or legislation changes, or kind of the softer side of financial planning, so like more ethical investment. We just didn't have time because everything was taken up on a one-to-one basis. And then what we did was, so a mutual friend of Terry and I had done this a few years before, and I'd said, there's no way we can do this because we do proper financial planning with lifetime cash flow forecasting, and everyone's different. And then eventually I worked out that he was right and I was wrong. And we introduced this client review workshop concept. Basically what it was an annual review, but in group format. So it was workshops like this with clients in the room together, or it was online. And we basically took everything that we were doing on a one-to-one basis, and we made it on a one-to-many basis. But what it did was it freed up a whole load of capacity, because we could suddenly we could do a way better job. So we could explain what was going on with the markets once, not 400 times. We could explain a legislation change once, but not 400 times. We explained things that we thought were irrelevant to some people, and then they would go, oh, but my brother is in that problem. Could you speak to him? Like, oh, okay, that's a new bonus. That's a new thing that we hadn't realized. We could remind them about, like, explaining how a lifetime cash flow forecast works or the estate planning works. So we could go through it in more detail. We could talk about ethical investing. So we would go through a whole lot more detail. But what we didn't say was this is instead of your one-to-one. We said it was in addition to. But they opted at the end of the client review workshop whether they wanted the one-to-one meeting. So if they've had a standard year and they've gone, well, actually, nothing's really changed. All I want to do is top up my ISA, top up my pension. There's nothing new here. You've told me that the market's okay and the portfolio is performing okay, and you've told me about legislation change. Then they just tick it in the form. Right, don't need a review meeting. Everything's good. But yes, by the way, I do want to top up my pension. I do want to top up my ISA. And there's no need for a one-to-one meeting. We've delivered them far more value. We've done it once, not 400 times. And it gives us the opportunity to explain things like the estate planning piece, which we didn't have time to do on a one-to-one basis. And they could just go, tick, yes, I do want a new will with trusts and LPAs and et cetera, et cetera. And then the team jump into action and facilitate all of that. And we don't need an extra one-to-one meeting. So we increased the fees, we reduced the time it took to review the client, and we increased the value that they perceive to have got. So it's like triple win. So it made a massive difference. But when it came to selling, and then when they said, yes, I do want a one-to-one meeting, instead of seeing me, they saw one of the other advisors, and they were now really happy with that. They didn't mind that because they know they'd heard from me, and this is what I was saying to you, Terry. If they hear from you and they know that as far as you're concerned, everything's going okay, that's when they're then really happy to deal with another advisor and go, yeah, okay. Yeah, I know Charlie said about the ethical investment. Yeah, I just wanted to ask a few follow-up questions on that, and then I'm happy to do it. Or I know Charlie talked about that legislation change. I wasn't clear how that worked for me, but could you just explain? And they know that it's around the principles of the person they trust most in the business. But instead of it being me that then sits down with them, they were then happy with another advisor to do that. But this was such a key thing when it came to selling the business. Because when it came to selling the business, we wanted to speak to every one of those 400 clients, but we also wanted to communicate one standard message to every one of those 400 clients. So next client review workshop, online or in person, we built the whole selling piece into that. Everyone got the same consistent message. Some people went, yep, brilliant, happy with that, tick that, done, don't even need to speak to them. Everyone else that went, yeah, I'm just not sure. Then one of the advisors is going in to follow up the conversation and make it applicable to them. So we got, when we sold our business, it was done to a company that needed us to migrate the clients onto their platform. We got the highest, as far as I'm aware, at the time anyway, we got the highest uptake rate of any firm that they'd done. We were the second biggest firm they'd ever bought, and we got the highest uptake rate of any firm they'd done. Because we'd trained all of our clients that we do it in this group communication way, independent of the founder. The founder gives the message, then everyone else does all the legwork. And it works brilliantly. And it was really the key to success in selling that business.
Is that what you call magnify?
So magnification mastery so that's one example of magnification mastery. Magnification mastery is basically saying, how do you take something that you're doing time and time again on a one-to-one basis and turn it into a one-to-many basis? And it's something like that may be the opportunity for you to generate a recurring revenue that you haven't got already, because it's that constant value add, but you're doing it on a one-to-many basis. And I know Claire and I have talked about this in the nutrition world as well. In the financial planning world, it's a really obvious one. So delegating clients to other people in the business. So for me, that was delegating clients to other financial advisors, was a massive step in the process. It made us a way more saleable business. If I had to go through and speak to all those 400 clients, write to those 400 clients, answer any questions from those 400 clients myself, there is no way we'd have got anything like the uptake. And I don't even know that, I don't know how we would have done it. But because we'd built it right with founder independence, it made a massive difference. We also made sure that every client, and this was not in the lead up to the sale, this is something we've done for years before, every client, in addition to having their appointed financial advisor, also had a client relationship manager. So that client relationship manager would have some financial services exams, but not be a fully qualified paraplanner. It's a great job actually in going from an administrator, between administrator and paraplanner. But they knew that that was the person that they phoned up anytime they'd got any questions. That was the person that was always available, as opposed to, their financial advisor, which might well be in meetings. So having that key point of contact, having a client relationship manager for every client, they knew exactly who that was. They could pick up the phone. They could say, hi, did you have a nice holiday? Client relationship manager, yes, and all of that kind of stuff. And, sometimes the answer would be, I'm not qualified to answer that question, but I'll go off and speak to the advisor, or I'll book you a meeting with the advisor. But having that single point of contact was really, again, really powerful. One of the other things within, and I know we covered this in the last workshop, but the real results roadmap proved to be a really key part of it. And if you read the books on, I'm going to sort of share with you over the course of this session, having a standardized process that everyone goes through is absolutely key to having a saleable and scalable business. Because if every advice, we used to say, once somebody sort of qualified beyond paraplanner and wanted to migrate up to financial advice, we just say, look, if you follow our financial planning process, if we put the clients in front of you and you just do this, follow this process, they'll end up becoming. We knew that 73% of people that came in for a first meeting ended up as a retained client. And it didn't matter whether I saw them or somebody else saw them. The percentage was the same because they just followed exactly the same process. And if you can build that process, and again, the real results roadmap for you guys that haven't seen that yet, it basically becomes a way more saleable and scalable business. So obviously we kind of went through the example last time. The efficient portfolio example was this one, but I'm not going to go into it in any detail because we did it last time. But having that set process that everyone goes through is incredibly powerful because it allows you to really upscale the operation, and to make sure that just a young, less experienced advisor will still get exactly the same conversion that the older, more experienced one. Yes.
That process, if complacency sets in, which it often does in various advisors, that process is not followed through, and you need to rein them back in to start using. Do you do it individually or as a group, and how do you do it?
I think that's it's a good question. How do you bring them back to using this process? Well, I think group training is a great way of doing it. Do it once and impact many. And it might be that, obviously it depends on how many advisors that you've got. I think another way you can do it is you could, in a world where you can be recording every meeting on an AI note taker, you can actually go, well, this is what good looks like, and AI could tell you these are the bits where this person missed it. So you could do both actually. But I think doing some coaching around and actually having key processes, so outstanding operations, to say this is what good meeting looks like. We would also, when we were training new advisors, we would record role plays and go, well, this is what good looks like. And so then you build up this library. So the next new advisor that comes along goes, well, watch these 5 videos, and this is what the perfect one looks like. And here's 4 others. And then here's the comments around why those ones weren't working very well. And then you just build up this learning library that so each time you do it, it becomes better and better. And then one of the books I read, I've been meaning to read this book for a while, and I hadn't. until recently is Built to Sell. So great book, particularly if you are thinking about selling. But what I really liked about it is the story. It's written around it's a parable type book, so it's written around a fake made up company. But that made up company is a marketing company. It's a marketing company that does a bit of everything. You know, they are they'll do, you know, an SEO campaign. They'll design a logo. They'll design brochures. They'll design kind of websites and all of these different things. And it's the story is the guy is like, oh, I just need to sell this business. It's doing my head in. So he goes to see a business coach, and the business coach, one of the things he says is, you need to simplify the operation, because at the moment everything's bespoke, everything's different. So he narrows it down and says, right, actually the thing that we do best, the one thing that we excel at most is logo design. And the guy gets him to turn the whole business into a logo design company. And that means that everyone follows the same real results roadmap, and they just sell logo design time and time and time again. They say no to any work that's not that, and they just focus on, and that's what allows them to build this saleable and scalable business, because it's delivering the same thing time and again to their ideal client. And if you think about it, Tesla did exactly this. They just went out and, you know, when they first launched the mass market cars, obviously they started with the Model S and the Model X, but then they brought in them. But even then, there's like 5 colors. There's 4 cars now. I mean, yes, I know there's a Cybertruck if you live in the US, and there's a Roadster if you wait about 5 years. But really, there's four cars. There's 5 colors. There's 3 options. I mean, I literally ordered the new Model Y in less than 5 minutes. Just go through, pick the color, pick whether is it long range or not. Do you want self-driving? Do you want a tow bar? That's it. You're done. Hit go. Put your Apple Pay £100 deposit. You've ordered a car. It's unbelievable, but it's really simple. They just stuck to their simple approach. And one of the other ways, if you're thinking about how do I create founder independence, last time we did the delegate compound. This is a process to go back to time and again. It's an opportunity to keep rethinking, how do I get rid of other stuff? Because, you know, like even with you, Bhavesh, who's right at the start of this journey, like, if you do this right from the start, you'll save yourself getting to the point where every advisor gets to, which is like, oh, I've got 100 clients. I'm now really busy. I haven't got any time to take on any new clients. I'm getting really bored because I'm talking to them all about the same thing the same time over again. And actually, the chase is way better than the kill. So many advisors end up getting to that point. So if you build it right from the start, and actually that whole magnification mastery piece, if we'd built the client review workshop from the start, we'd have retained way more clients. We'd have had a far more saleable business. We'd have got to that 5-year target way quicker than we would have ever done. So yeah, build it right from the start with founder independence. The next piece is the recurring revenue piece. So the next business I sold was a business called the Rural Business Community. So we had this redundant old hay barn. That's not redundant, that's the refurb version. We had a redundant old hay barn on a farm that we lived on. And I needed an office for efficient portfolio, but this barn was way bigger than any office that we needed. So, because I think at the time we'd probably got 3 or 4 employees. So he said, well, what I'll do is I'll turn it into a rural serviced office business. I applied for EMDA funding, so we could get EU funding. Actually, it was amazing. So we were going through this EMDA funding process, which was the most ridiculous admin-heavy job ever. I was working efficient portfolio 9 till 5, coming home, putting the kids to bed, having dinner with them, and then going back to work, but on the grant funding bit until at least midnight, which is not a sustainable way of doing it. But so in one of the conversations with the person that was there to support you with your grant funding, she said, I know it's a 50% matched funding cap, but this year we're struggling to get rid of all the money. It was not long after the credit crunch. We're struggling to get rid of all the money. So if you think you need more than 50%, don't limit. And I'm like, that's just, you're basically telling me to ask for more money, aren't you? You're saying, please ask for more money because we need to get rid of this, otherwise we won't get as much next time. So I asked for 65%, got 63%. So this was all the build. I mean, this was of the build cost. So that was about, I think the end grant was 250,000 of EU money. So we're putting in a little over 150,000. Anyway, it was amazing. So we created the rural business community, but the rural business community became saleable because it was basically just built on recurring income. It was just rented out to people that paid a set amount of money for offices. And the guy who bought the farmhouse said, actually, that's an asset that I would quite like to buy. He was a fund manager, so he said, I need an extra year, I need an extra year's bonus to cover the purchase of that bit. But sure enough, that's exactly what he did. He bought it a year later because it was a passive income. And recurring income is hugely valuable within a business. And I was doing a coaching session, I would guess, end of 2019. And this guy was doing it on 10 principles around sale. And he mentioned recurring income. And he said, who here has more than like 10% of recurring income? And there was half of us maybe. Who here has more than 50% recurring income? And I was the only person left standing up. And he said, the most important of all of these 10 principles in selling a business is the recurring income piece. I was like, that's nice to know. Not quite sure I understand why, but it sort of makes sense. And then COVID happened. And everyone's business that didn't have recurring income was on their knees. And I was sitting there going, well, 75% of my turnover will carry on next year. And yes, I'm going to lose 25% of revenue, but equally my costs are less. So I was sitting, chatting to friends of mine that run like huge companies, and they were absolutely shitting themselves around whether their business was going to be there a year from now. And I was sitting there going, fortunately, I know my business will just carry on. Yeah, the recurring might drop a bit because the markets might drop, but actually it'll just keep ticking along. And in the years post-COVID, that massively changed. That had a much greater impact on valuations than it had done previously, because everybody realized the value of recurring income in times of crisis. So the more you can build this in, the better. And definitely, and I know for some businesses you're going to be like, well, how do I do that in my business? There's not, and I know that there's not, like with financial services, you kind of fall on your feet and you go, there's a really obvious fee model to charge a recurring income. But how do you charge it? How do you increase that is one of the questions I would ask. Can you add on services? So we historically also charged a flat retainer for financial planning over and above the investment management. So having a flat retainer that sits on top, we didn't do that towards the end, but what we could have done was for the estate planning piece, for the wills and trusts and the reviewing and the updating of that, we could quite easily have, and I know firms that charge a flat retainer on top of their financial planning percentage to do that. For businesses, it's not natural. You still realize that, so if you design their dream home, you manage the build of it all the way through. And then at that point, they've now got their dream home and they want to keep it their dream home. So at that point, they will be open to the idea of saying, for a small amount of recurring cost, I know I can come back to you and talk to you about all of these other things that are that I'm worried about in the future when, water starts pissing out the ceiling or whatever it is. So there is definitely an opportunity to do that. Percentages are definitely better than pounds. When we went through the what was called RDR, Retail Distribution Review, where advisors switched to working on a fee basis, we actually increased our fees when, for most advisors, they saw a drop in their fees, because we had done 0.5% plus. So typically at that point, we were charging 0.5% of their investments, which might have been, let's say, £5,000, and then a £1,000 flat fee retainer for the financial planning piece. We never got quibbles or questions about the £5,000 because it was 0.5% and it sounded small. we always got quibbles and moans about the flat fee, which was £1,000, even though it was a fifth of the other fee. So in RDR, we decided we would go up to 0.95 and scrap the flat fee. So suddenly now we'd gone up to £9,500 worth of fees, and we dropped the £1,000 retainer, and clients were happier. So if you can charge on a percentage basis, it's definitely better and more digestible than it is on a pounds basis. The engine for growth, we've talked about that quite a lot over previous workshops, and we're going to come on to this over the course of this afternoon session. There's lots and lots of ways that you can build an automated marketing machine, and I'm not going to dive into any particular detail. You know, whether it's having a book, whether it's calculators, whether it's online tools like the 2-minute retirement plan, whether it's newsletters, whether it's referral processes, which we'll come on to, whether it's particular events that drive certain things, whether it's online courses, whether it's a podcast, whether it's webinars, all of these different things you can automate. And the more of this stuff you can build and automate, the more you build the engine for growth. I honestly thought the company that would buy Efficient Portfolio would be a consolidator that wanted to buy one firm that had kind of worked out the marketing piece and then just apply that marketing piece to all the other firms that they bought. As it happens, that wasn't how it worked out. But that to me was where our greatest value was. So the same applies to the trusted team, you know, whether it's the Unleash the Power of AI, which is the evergreen webinar. So I record that once, but it's always there. If you go onto the website now, amazingly, I'll be about to present at 11 o'clock the AI, Unleash the Power of AI. So building an evergreen webinar is a brilliant way of driving that. Having a quiz funnel like the Entrepreneur Happiness Scoreboard, having the podcast, book, Friday footnotes, newsletters, all of that sort of stuff is about building the engine for growth. Because the problem is that, particularly in professional services, what tends to happen is you've got lots of time at the start, so therefore you've got the time to find clients and you get more clients, but then as you get busy, you can give each client less attention, then they get irritated because they get a worse experience, which means you get less clients, which means you get more time back, and then you go off and find more clients again. And you end up with this ridiculously vicious flywheel that means that you don't go any further. Whereas actually, if you look at Amazon as the example, the reason that Amazon succeeded was because they had the reverse effect. They had, well, okay, if we find some customers, then we find more people that will sell stuff on Amazon. The more sellers we get, the more selection we get, which means that they get a better experience, which means that drives more traffic, which means we find more customers, and the flywheel continues to go in the right direction. And that's what we're trying to do, is if we build this automated marketing machine and automate as much of what the founder does as possible, we can actually build this thing where it actually gets better and better the bigger it gets, as opposed to worse and worse. And one of the ways that we did that at Efficient Portfolio was investment management. We would, if a client came to us and said, I want this bespoke type of investment, we would say, in that case, you need to go somewhere else. This is the way that we manage our client money. And we do it because this makes us scalable and effective and be able to deliver a consistent process. As soon as you end up with a different bespoke solution for each person, you end up with something that isn't scalable. And in fact, actually, in Built to Sell, I hadn't planned on mentioning this, but it was something I've shared with Charlotte. When you're recruiting a salesperson, you try and recruit a salesperson that has previously sold products, not services. Because the people that have been trained to sell services are trained to sell bespoke solutions. Yeah, we can do that. You need that. Yeah, we can do that. Yeah, don't worry. We've never done it before, but we'll do that. Whereas people that have been taught to sell products only sell what's there. That's the product we have. I'll work out how we sell it to you. So creating this one solution and sticking to simplifying your offering is definitely really powerful. Can't remember what I was going to talk about there with regards to the AI masterclass, but it must have been useful. And then the exit vision. So knowing what you're actually heading for and targeting is really key. So with a hub and spoke, obviously it's built with this founder independence. So I was, when at the start they were like, right, we're going to get somebody in to do the coffee training. I'm like, no, I'm not doing it. I don't want to know, because if I know, at some point you'll say, oh, so and so's called in sick. Can you step in and make the coffee? No, I'm not doing that. So you've got to create this founder independence, and therefore you build it to run without you. And we've done the same with Accelerate Advisor Solutions. Other than their leadership meeting, I don't see, and bumping into in the office, I don't see them at all. They just run the business themselves. One of the ways you need to achieve this is to need to measure what matters. You need to know what the numbers are. You need to know whether you're moving in the right direction, and you need to keep track of those numbers. And the Successful Business Scorecard, if you haven't done that piece in the Trusted Team, I would really encourage you to go back and look at that. But having that one line of weekly numbers where you know whether you're hitting the goals specifically, and knowing, and everyone in the team knowing that they have an impact on each or at least one of the numbers on that Successful Business Scorecard, is incredibly powerful here. But the key really, and it applies to any type of goal setting, is to know the target and when. We talk about setting smart goals. Well, that is really the key here. It's about saying, I am creating a goal to sell my business on this time frame for this number. It's specific, it's measurable. Yes, if you it's got to be relatively achievable. If you put the number of 10 billion down, it might be not quite achievable. But it's got to be big enough and scary enough to make you think, I have no idea how I'm going to get there. But you don't need to know how now. You just need to know what the target is and when. And so, we Efficient Portfolio, we changed the goal from 5 years to 1 year. So I dropped the bombshell with the leadership team. We had no clue, and actually, I didn't at that point even say to them, but I'm sticking to the 5 year number. But amazingly, we hit the 5 year number. So we set the goal for 5 years. Now, actually, there was a weird irony. So we had about a year of trying to get our head around this concept. We had a year of deciding who we were going to sell the business to and how. And then we had a year of kind of getting it all over the line and migrating the clients across. We then had 2 years of regulatory nightmare trying to get the final deal. So as it happens, it almost was 5 years, even though we decided after a year. But like I said, we hit the exact number that we set, which was unbelievable. But I have no doubt, because of the way that we've talked about goal setting before and how amazing it is when you set a goal. Like, it's not by surprise that 3 years after, even though when I put Ironman on my goals, 3 year goals, I'd never run more than 6 miles in my life, and I wasn't running at all at the time. I hadn't swum since school and got no clue as to how I could swim. I was okay at cycling. But it's no surprise that 3 years later I did my first Ironman. Exactly the same happened when I wrote The Dream Retirement, which I've shared with you before. No idea how to write a book, but stick it on the 3 year goals, and 3 years, almost to the month later, I've got a published book in my hand. So it's incredible when you set this very specific goal, how things end up being achieved that way. And the key here really is that it doesn't matter whether you actually want to sell the business at that point. You may decide that you don't want to sell the business at that point. But if you've got this amazing amazing business, if you've got this amazing business that runs whether you're there or not, then you can choose whether you want to sell it. It's at its most valuable. It's at its most saleable. But you then decide whether you just carry on and you do it 1 day a week or 1 day a month or whatever it is, and you only do the bits in the business that you love, or you do decide to sell it and you go off and do something slightly differently. And of course, then it's also about what comes next. So really, in summary, what we're looking at is trying to find ways to create founder independence, trying to create more recurring revenue. And if it's not revenue, if you're feeling like I've already mastered the recurring revenue bit, then how do I automate more of the processes? What processes can I automate? How do I build this engine for growth? And how do I create this exit vision?